Cycling during the winter can be a very enjoyable experience, but choosing the wrong kit can make or break your ride. It can even damage your morale, making you struggle to get out on your bike when the weather isn't too kind outside. But it isn't as simple as this jacket is better than that jacket anymore, and there's plenty of styles and fabrics to choose from. Also, there's plenty of top tips to be had to enjoy your winter riding, keeping you nice and toasty when the weather is super cold or soaking wet. So I'm here with YANTO Barker, who isn't just an ex-professional rider, but he's also the founder of the fastest growing cycling brand in the UK, which is Le Col. And he's here to give us some top tips on how to keep warm this winter. So YANTO, what should people worry about when they're first heading out on a ride during the winter?
Good question. Well, it depends if you're riding on your own, in a group, in the cold or the wet, or both cold and wet. They all are quite different riding experiences and you need to dress appropriately. So it's really important that you know what that's going to be like before you set out. The difference between cold and wet, it doesn't actually take that much wet to feel very cold. When you're riding along, you've always got a chill. And when you're wet, then that chill is combining with the moisture and it will make you very, very cold. So we wear garments that lock in the heat. Often people talk about very waterproof garments as boiling in a bag, but actually if you use it in the conditions that it's designed for, that's exactly what you want. You really want to make sure you don't lose a single ounce of heat. And especially if it's a longer ride and you're tired, then you can't push on hard enough to generate the heat from the inside to keep replenishing the body heat that you need to stay warm. So that's one of the really important aspects.
So it's almost separating the two out. So when it's wet, you want to keep the moisture out as much as possible and retain the heat. But when it's cold and dry, you just want to have something breathable because you're maintaining your own heat, keeping warm, but you don't need to boil in a bag.
No, exactly. So basically, when it's wet, you want to create a locking layer, which is a bit kind of stronger against the elements. When it's cold, you can actually have a much more permeable layer, which means your heat is coming out, and because you're generating from the inside, and also you're creating a situation where you're not sweating, and then you don't create the chill, you don't get the moisture, and you can actually generate and keep an even level temperature, which is obviously very important as well.
Okay, so how does riding in a group or riding on your own change things? And equally, when on a short ride or a long ride, how are we changing things there?
Group is actually quite a difficult riding situation to cater for with an even temperature, which is what you want to try and achieve all the time, because on the front you might be producing 3 or 350 watts. On the back you might be at 100 watts, and for anyone that doesn't use a power meter, that's basically pushing quite hard and generating a lot of heat and sweat. And then sitting on the back where you're still getting the chill because you're traveling at the same speed, but you're just not putting out the power that's generating the heat. So things like the zip is something you should be using on your ride, whether you're on the front and you zip it down so as you can really make sure there's that airflow, and then when you're on the back you zip it back up again and you stay warm. And those things kind of need to be taken into consideration, so you have a variable intensity, and that's just a little bit harder to cater for. Solo rides are actually quite a nice way to enjoy the outside, the countryside and a bit of fresh air and everything, especially being cooped up in the office. And it's easier to keep an even pace on an individual ride, because you just ride at what you want to do. No one's kind of getting overexcited and going through and off, and we've all been in that situation where, let's just do a little bit of through and off, and it turns into smash fest.
Yeah, and there's a bit of town sign at the end.
Exactly. So when you're on your own, generally you kind of just ride around, and again, it's all about even temperatures, even speeds, even intensities, because they all start to feed into each other. Yeah. So individual rides are kind of good for, what intensity you're going to ride at, you can plan that, the temperature, and you can keep it even all the way through.
Okay.
On a long ride, what the danger is, you can't push hard enough for long enough to stay warm, and you have to remember that your heat generation from the intensity that you ride at is a big factor in what is keeping you warm. So suddenly if you get tired, then you can't push on, you can't generate the heat, and you need another layer. So I recommend taking emergency layers, either a gilet or a thin cape, or even quite thicker capes, as long as it can fit in your pocket. And you can use that either towards the end of the ride, or let's say you go out early and it's really cold to start with, then you want to make sure you've got that layer in first, and then you can take it off halfway around or whatever. Those are things that can be really, really helpful.
Because there's nothing worse than being tired and cold on a bike ride, and it can really break you mentally? Because obviously you're hours from home, right? And you know, they're the times when food starts to get
Yeah, I
thin
can
and-
tell you genuinely from experience, don't do it. No, it's very painful, and it can take you days and days to get over the psychological damage you do to yourself. And you know, my job is really about the experience in what I've done and all the mistakes I've made, which we've probably both done, so as you don't have to. That's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, brilliant.
So shorter rides are something you can dress a little bit lighter for, because quite often if you've only got a short ride, let's say you're pressed for time on either work or family or something, which is really common these days, you can press on quite hard, which means you don't actually need to wear as much as you might think. Because you're only doing a short ride, you know you can keep up the intensity, and you can keep that running through all the way to the end. So that's a nice thing to just take into consideration.
Yeah. So a large portion of this really is that your body generates a lot of heat, and it's managing that heat you produce,
Yeah.
right? So one thing that is largely overlooked by most cyclists, and most modern cyclists especially, is that accessories can make your ride a little bit more comfortable. So something like a buff or a necky from Le Col actually keep the drafts out from around your neck. And for me personally, that is a major thing on a bike ride, is just keeping that section nice and warm, because that's where you can feel some of the elements. Obviously, jackets now come with a nice long collar anyway, but a bit of extra protection is really handy.
I wear the buff over the back of my head.
Do you?
And around your ears, and then it just stops the wind coming through. Yeah, it's quite a versatile bit of kit.
It is, yeah.
But I also like headbands, and a good thermal hat under your helmet are really useful and make a lot of difference. Obviously your head is one, it's at the front, it takes a lot of wind,
Yeah.
and two, obviously there's a lot of veins and arteries very close to the surface, which is obviously part of why we lose heat there. So yeah, protecting that area is really important.
So another important accessory is the gilet. I love a gilet, you love a gilet. You know, they come in various different forms, very packable, lightweight, windproof, or something a bit like this, which is a bit more meaty and has some pockets, which I think is essential for a gilet, because you can fit your gels, you know, your phone is easily accessible if you need it, that type of thing. But the gilet is very, very important.
Fun fact for you, Simon, I was in the wind tunnel recently, and there's almost no aerodynamic difference on a jersey when you wear a gilet over the top like that.
Wow.
So you won't go any slower either.
Yeah, that is good news. And another important thing to look after is your hands and feet. So Yanto today has got some toe covers on just to protect his little pinkies. But those are the things that are going to get severely cold when the temperature drops. And if they get really, really wet, they're the first things that are going to go. And your hands are in control of your brakes and gears, right?
Yeah, so just going back to the feet, there's another little fun fact. I notice my feet get colder when you push a bit harder. So while the
Really?
rest of my body gets warm, my feet get cold, because when you press hard, you push the blood out of your feet.
Wow,
And so there's not so much flow coming
Yeah.
back to replenish the warmth. So actually going a little bit slower was like, do I want my feet to be warm, or do I want the rest of me to be warm? And I had to make a choice between the two. But obviously that's pro challenges.
But that's why you see Yanto at the back of the group, because he's got to look after his feet,
Yeah.
and he can't press too hard on the
But
pedal.
hands and feet often do get cold. Obviously, we've talked about a balance in temperature, and then feet, hands, body, core. Most of the heat is coming from your core, and obviously comes down your extremities to your hands, and the blood bringing the warmth back to your fingers, kind of thing. So actually, it can be really useful to wear arm warmers under your jacket, which keeps the warmth in the blood further down the arm, so when it gets to your hands, it's got more warmth to give your fingers.
Wow.
And you get a bit
That's
more
something I
dexterity.
haven't tried before, actually.
Yeah, I used to wear it a lot. So that way you don't get a really sweaty core, because you
Yeah.
think you just pile on more and more layers. Well, there's some elements that are already warm enough. You just want trying to heat the areas that aren't warm without overheating the areas that are. Obviously, it's just a balance.
Of course. Another thing you can add to your gloves is a thin liner on the inside of your glove, which adds a little bit more protection to those elements as well. So if you do suffer, and a lot of cyclists do suffer with their hands getting too cold, there are two great top tips.
We've talked about outer layers,
Yeah.
but we haven't talked about underlayers, and I mean base layers. And it's really important. They are considered just as much as your outer layer, because it's the combination of the two that keeps you warm, keeps you the right temperature, and keeps you comfortable on your bike. So I am a real fan of varying different types of underlayers, from long sleeve, short sleeve, sleeveless, thick, mesh, both winter and summer combinations of the two, to make sure that together with your outer layer you get the right balance, and that means the right temperature, and that means a happy ride.
And so, what about fabrics?
Fabrics are a really important aspect of pretty much any garment, for a number of different reasons, both performance-wise, but also fit, feel. Stretch is always an element of sizing and fit, And well, I'm quite lucky probably because I've been the same shape as I've always been pretty much the whole time I've ridden my bike, and even now post-retirement, and it means that all my garments, they all fit the same and it's very easy for me. But some people fluctuate in size or weight depending on the time of the year, and that's something that actually you can really take into consideration. Picking garments that have a bit more give or a bit more kind of less structure and can tailor to your shape a bit more easily when maybe it doesn't stay the same throughout the year. That's something to take into consideration, as well as winter garments are a bit heavier, so the types of fabrics that you use are a little bit stronger anyway, and it means maybe you need to size up. Summer garments obviously are a bit lighter, thinner, stretchier, and those things can change the way they feel when you're wearing them.
Yeah. So in the winter, are you looking for a more relaxed fit? Because you're not fully aggressive right down. Is that something you need to consider with the way it's shaped?
It depends how you ride. I mean, some people try and ride fast all year round. I do. Other people want to ride slower in the winter and relax and then build up into a season if they're going to race or do some sportives or something. But I think it's important that you recognise what type of rider you are and then make sure you buy clothing and kit that is specifically best and fit for purpose for what you're doing.
Okay, great. But that's all talk about keeping yourself warm and dry on your bike rides, but there's one other aspect that your winter clothing needs to have, and that's being seen, so reflectives. So Yanto, you're obviously very bright today, but you've got some key points where you're quite reflective. For good reason.
Yeah, so I think it's really important that you do consider the fact that in the winter you're going to be riding in maybe poor light, even the dark. You know, unfortunately, there's not as many daylight hours as there are in the summer. So things like reflective panels, which are really important, and at Le Col we design them so as they try and create a picture of what you are, and that's a rider on the road. So as even if a car driver detects you with just a glance of their eye from corner of their vision, they recognise what you are and how fast you're travelling and what that means they're going to need to do either around you or to avoid you. So that's really important. Also the colour, there's lots of black garments, and I'm a real fan of navy, which is the top you've got underneath that gilet. But equally, some people are very, very concerned about being visible, and this colour was introduced to the range this season to make sure that we tick that box too.
Definitely. Be safe, be seen. So, thanks Yanto. There's some great advice in there to help you guys at home keep nice and warm and dry during the winter months. But if you have your own top tips, do leave a comment in our comment section below. And if you've enjoyed this video, do like it. And if you want to subscribe to our channel, please do so as well. But until then, we'll see you next time.